Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We'd like to start back with our luncheon program by bringing back to the stage B. Solis.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully you've enjoyed the day so far. I know for me it's just like lots of great information, and it's actually super nice to run into so many people and friends. So it's such a joy to receive so many hugs and just connecting. So welcome back. We hope, it gives me really, it just kind of warms my heart at this particular moment that we're going to honor a very special SCG member who is retiring at the end of this year, Ed Kane, Vice President of Programs at the Conrad Hilton Foundation. Ed's retirement, yes. Ed's retirement caps an almost 50-year career promoting sustainable development. Ed served on the SCG board for 6 years, including as our highly esteemed and valued vice chair. Ed, would you please join me up here on stage? And Chris, please come up. SCG is thrilled to present Ed with the Heart of Philanthropy Award. In fact, our inaugural Heart of Philanthropy Award was presented to Steve Hilton in 2015 as he was retiring. And then in 2016, it was presented to Carl Bolton on the occasion of his retirement from Union Bank and from the SCG board. So Ed, you are in excellent company, which is exactly as it should be.
Thanks, Dee. Thanks very much.
We're going to take some pictures after. You want to take a picture? Yeah. So hold on, Ed. I still have a few words. This gets to the juicy part of it. So for me personally, it was a true privilege to work with you for 3 years. We overlapped on the SCG board, especially during your tenure as vice chair while I was the secretary. You were definitely the best, favorite contrarian, and it was so much fun attending those executive meetings. Your unique perspective and willingness to ask the tough questions elevated the conversation to a level that really increased everyone's attention and focus. And I remember several of those conversations where I was trying to mediate or trying to insert myself amongst this small committee. And that's where I started using the term sandpaper moments. We would have some of these sandpaper moments, but as I mentioned, very important and deep conversations that were required. So Ed, I again just want to say thank you for all of your work, your heart and your mind, and your goal of really seeing change, not only in Southern California, but in the world. So Ed, I want you to know that this piece was made by the nonprofit Piece by Piece, which provides free mosaic art workshops to low-income and formerly homeless people. We hope this is a fitting tribute to the work you've led at Hilton, especially knowing that you have always approached this growing crisis of homelessness in our communities with compassion and vision rooted in our common humanity. What better way to recognize this truth and your service through this art? So Ed, I'm going to give you the podium now.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Pete. Thank you. Well, I only learned about this a couple of days ago, and so I thought I'd better collect some thoughts to reflect on my 50 years. And you're probably wondering, 50 years? This guy's been working 50 years. It's hard for me to believe as well. I started when I was age 5. But this is a bittersweet moment for me because, bitter because I'll be leaving on a regular basis. I hope to see many that I've developed friendships over the 13 years that I've been here at the almost 13 years at the Hilton Foundation. But I won't be seeing you on quite as regular a basis. But sweet, because I won't be having to navigate the 101 up to Westlake Village any longer. But on a more serious note, sweet because I'm looking out at an audience that reflects how SCG has grown and become such a vital organization for our community. You know, when I first got associated with SCG, there was about 110 members, just a half a dozen staff. It was basically a membership organization. But when we brought Chris Essel on board 5 years ago, and I'm very proud to say that I was on the recruitment team, and we brought somebody in that wanted to give purpose to this organization. And we talked about the risks that would entail. If you really stand for something, are you going to alienate some of your membership? And I think your presence here today is proof that you want to make this organization stand for something so that we collectively as Philanthropy can have a more meaningful impact. And it's on those public policy issues where, and when Chris said this morning that the growth and scope, impact, and the word that resonated with me was courage, because there's been real courage shown by Chris and her team to be on the leading edge of some of these pressing issues that we face in our community and beyond. You know, I looked at the website, and it's just rich with information. The affinity groups that have grown, that brings this collective focus that some of you are interested in and what we're interested in. We're very proud that we've had some role in creating the international peer group, affinity group, an area I think that has potential for tremendous growth. But it's just the 30 seconds or more that I have left to just say something and having this bully pulpit. The conference is about our common humanity, and I was struck by Professor Powell this morning saying the need for common universal goals, a strategy to advance this our common humanity, and the need for change in structures that are perpetuating inequities. And those of you that know me know where this is leading, and that is that when the professor said we need a strategy and goals, the Hilton Foundation and me coming from a international background, having worked for a number of years for the UN, believe that the Sustainable Development Goals offer that kind of vision. There are goals, there are targets, and there are metrics to hold us accountable to working collectively together on 17 goals interconnected, which I think is going to advance our common humanity. The SCG website has resources that explain what the SDGs are about. I will tell you that I was a little disappointed when I looked at the Foundation Center website, which tracks how transparent and accountable philanthropy is, and they've added to the 26 criteria to be an accountable philanthropist. They've added, do you frame your work within the SDGs? And only 7 foundations have been able to tick off that box. So I'd urge you to take a look at that too, as you do your philanthropic work. And the last 2 points is that the Hilton Foundation on the 19th of October will be having a conference at the Beverly Hilton Hotel entitled Resetting Our Moral Compass, which I think is very relevant to the discussions that are going on here today, and I think will add to the conversation on how we can get down to concrete action on these issues. And then I'm very much looking forward to the closing session today, which is entitled, Is It Time for a New American Social Compact? And I would argue that it indeed is, but a social compact that embraces all the global challenges we face as well. So thank you again very much and allowing me this moment of reflection. Appreciate it.
Thank you and congratulations. All our best wishes to you, Ed. And everyone, just one more time, you got to give it up for the man. He's been wonderful. And now it is my honor to introduce our luncheon plenary, Adopting a Trauma-Informed Lens in Philanthropy, featuring incredible performance by Daniel Beaty. Daniel's work as an actor, singer, writer, and activist is deeply rooted in a desire to tell stories that illuminate our shared humanity by giving voice to the voiceless and often overlooked in our society. He believes story is at the heart of every challenge and every possibility, and we individually and collectively have the power to write a story that creates opportunity and access for all. Daniel believes a core strategy to accomplish this goal is to create complex, layered portrayals of the most overlooked in our society through his plays, music, films, television shows, and books, as well as to empower our nation's most vulnerable and disenfranchised young people to heal and become social justice leaders in their communities through his program, I Dream. Despite the challenges and confusion that currently plague our nation, together we can frame a deep narrative of deep humanity and create an America that provides equal opportunity for all of our citizens. Daniel will do this performance and then be joined by Martine, President and CEO of the Children's Institute Incorporated, and moderated by Judy, Belk, President and CEO of the California Wellness Foundation. So without further ado, please welcome Daniel Beaty.
Let's see how I'm gonna maneuver this. Sometimes I feel like a fatherless child. Sometimes I feel like a fatherless child. Sometimes I feel like a fatherless child, a long ways from home, a long ways from my home. As a boy, I shared a game with my father. We played it every morning till I was 3. He would knock on my door, and I would pretend to be asleep till he got right next to the bed. Then I would get up and jump into his arms. Good morning, Papa. And my papa, he would tell me that he loved me. We shared a game, knock, knock, to that day when the knock never came. And my mama takes me on a ride past cornfields on this never-ending highway till we reach a place of high, rusty gates. A confused little boy entered the building, carried in my mama's arms. Knock, knock. We reach a room of windows and brown faces. Behind one of the windows sits my father. I jump out of my mama's arms and run joyously towards my papa's, only to be confronted by this window. I knock, knock, trying to break through the glass, trying to get to my father. I knock, knock as my mama pulls me away before my papa even says a word. And for years, he has never said a word. And so years later, I write these words with a little boy in me who still awaits his papa's knock. Papa, come home because I miss you. I miss you waking me up in the mornings and telling me you love me. Papa, come home because there's things I don't know. And I thought maybe you could teach me how to shave, how to dribble a ball, how to talk to a lady, how to walk like a man. Papa, come home, set aside a while back. I want to be just like you, but I'm forgetting who you are. And years later, a little boy cries, and so I write these words, and I try to heal, and I try to father myself, and I dream up a father who says the words my father did not. Dear son, I'm sorry I never came home. For every lesson I failed to teach here, these words: shave in one direction with strong, deliberate strokes to avoid irritation. Dribble the page with the brilliance of your ballpoint pen. Walk like a god, and your goddess will come to you. No longer will I be there to knock on your door, so you must learn to knock for yourself. Knock, knock down doors of racism and poverty that I could not. Knock, knock on doors of opportunity for the lost brilliance of the black men who crowd these cells. Knock, knock with diligence for the sake of your children. Knock, knock for me, for as long as you are free, these prison gates cannot contain my spirit. The best of me still lives in you. Knock, knock with the knowledge that you are my son, but you are not my choices. Yes, we are our Father's sons and daughters, but we are not their choices. For despite their absences, we are still here, still alive, still breathing, with the power to change this world, one little boy and girl at a time. Knock, knock, who's there? We are. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So again, my name is Daniel Beaty, and the poem I just shared is a part of my personal story. My father was my principal caregiver for the first 3 years of my life. When my mom was off being a social worker, my father was the one who would change my diapers and carry me on his shoulders at the grocery store. But when I was 3 years old, he was arrested for the first time and did not ever come again to wake me up for our morning ritual of our knock-knock game. My father was a heroin addict and heroin dealer and has been in and out of prison 60 times, 60, over the course of my life. My older brother, 10 years older, followed in my father's footsteps and became addicted to crack cocaine and has also been in and out of prison. And sometimes when he was high on crack, he would physically abuse me. I had yet another brother, 8.5 years older, who sexually abused me repeatedly. Add on top of that the issues of race and poverty in this country, and I think it is fair to say that I had a childhood rife with trauma. And this trauma impacted every aspect of my mental, emotional, and physical health, including being diagnosed with PTSD, severe depression, even a suicide attempt in college. But I am so grateful to stand before you today after a long healing journey of a testament that even in the most traumatic of situations, there is the capacity and the possibility of healing. In my journey, I have been, thank you. In my journey, I've been blessed. When I graduated from Yale, I received one of the 3 highest honors and was able to march in front of my class carrying the president's flag. I have a thriving career in entertainment. But if there's one thing my journey has taught me, is that achievement does not equal wellness. Achievement does not equal wellness. And in my journeys as an artist and as an educator, I've encountered so many people, particularly young people, who need to know this truth. And I've also encountered so many well-meaning intentioned funders who often go after some of the surface needs of our most vulnerable citizens. And we overlook the deep power of addressing trauma and the core identity and issues of self-worth that trauma can create. Because of this, in 2011, I created, in partnership with the Children's Institute Incorporated and through an initial grant from the Kellogg Foundation, I Dream, which uses the tools of the art combined with mental health therapy to help people understand that we all have trauma, but we also have the capacity to heal that trauma. And no matter the narratives of lack or the sense that there is no possibility that trauma can create, We are indeed the authors of our lives. We are the authors of our stories, and with the right tools, we can heal. So before we begin our conversation, I would just like to share with you one more piece of my art that underscores both the impact that trauma can have on one's psyche, as well as the power of owning one's narrative in healing that trauma. I've been told every action begins with a thought. And if you don't watch what you're thinking, your thoughts will get the best of you. It's like the mind is an untrained child. You've got to teach what to do. Because sometimes my mind, he tells me, you will never be enough. Why even try? You know it's going to be tough. Look at where you live. Broken hopes, broken dreams. At night you lie in bed and scream the silent scream of a bastard child without a father as a guide. There's no daddy by your side. So you push your cries away and you fill that space with rage. A rage that keeps you caged in a cycle that never ends. You ain't gonna be no better than the man who fathered you, able to create life, but not to follow through. Your daddy left, so you will too. The sins of the father will visit the son. When life gets tough, the abandoned run. So sag your pants, wear a frown, give up first before life tears you down. Run from dreams, run from hope. It's the only way to cope with the failure you will be. A spitting image of the father you will never even see. Those are the thoughts my mind, he says to me, trying to choke out any type of hope or possibility. And that's why I dig into the depths of me and talk back to my mind. All right, I've heard enough. I know my path is rough, but my mama, she was there, and she helped me to prepare. A father, she was not, but still she gave me a lot. And I've got God too, and he helps me make it through. Say what you want, but there's nothing I can't do, because I define my destiny. I won't let doubt get the best of me. I will father myself, and my children will see a black man days. This can be just a phase. This cycle can end. It all depends on where we go from here. You say when life gets tough, the abandoned run. Well, I say run, black man, run. Run to your children, hold them tight. Help them make it through the night. Be more than you think you can. Be a man and take a stand. And when you make it through, reach back and help another person do what we all know must be done. Run, black man, run. A fatherless child I may be, but I decide who I choose to be. Run, black man, run. Run, black man, run. Run, black man, run. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, cool. Perfect.
Can you guys hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. Hi, I'm Judy Belk. I'm the president and CEO of the California Wellness Foundation. This is Martine, who is president and CEO of the Children's Institute. And we have been stalking Daniel all over LA.
Oh, please.
You guys just got a little teaser of this man's magnificent power. About a week ago, Martine and I hosted a production of Daniel, his full-length presentation, about 90 minutes, called Emergency. And then I ran into Daniel yesterday at the Hollywood Trader Joe's. I looked terrible.
No, you did.
And then unfortunately, he recognized me. So, you know, I'm glad we're going to have more time
Yes.
today to be in conversation. And we're going to just pretend we've got 500 of our best friends sitting around the
That
table.
works for me.
And you said I can ask you anything.
Anything.
Anything at all.
Yeah.
So one of the comments when you did your emergency presentation about a week ago is someone came up to me afterwards and said, boy, is he courageous, telling his story, talking about his father and his brothers. And, I write a lot about my family, and I often get that about, boy, you're courageous. Do you feel courageous?
There's a saying, we overcome through the power of our testimony. And when you've experienced a lot of trauma, there's narratives of shame that can keep you bound. And as I've journeyed to heal and to truly love myself, and also to understand that even the family members that hurt me were the products of inherited hurt, I think that it's so important to be very vocal and be very honest about the things that we all experience. Because there are so many people out here hurting in silence and in secret. So I look at it as purpose more than courage.
Okay, so go a little deeper
Sure.
on that. Talk a little bit about the shame part and help us understand your journey. You said you're healthy. You seem healthy.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about how you went through the process of getting healthy, that you can stand in front of the stage and share your story with such intensity.
Right. It's been a very long journey for me, and as I mature, the way I define healthy and wellness is the capacity to have all of my feelings and to trust that I can handle them, right? So it doesn't mean that I don't get angry. It doesn't mean that I don't get sad. It means that I trust myself, But the journey has been a long one. And for me, it started with achievement. I just knew I had to get out of the circumstances that I was in, so I became an achiever. And I say that because, particularly with our young people, there is some great value in giving them access to the arts, which is what saved me. And it gave me a safe place to put my emotions and my feelings, and it gave me a bridge over troubled waters so that I could then get to a place where I could get well. Then I started with, my spiritual journey, but also mental health. And, there can be a stigma in some communities, as there was in my community, around mental health, but then I was able to, get a scholarship to Yale and see things and experience things that I wouldn't otherwise. And the idea of taking care of your mind the way you take care of your body was normal, and I was able to start getting mental health support then. But it's been a continual journey. And what the trauma created in me was the belief that I did not have worth, that my life did not matter, that I did not have value. And I was an imposter. So even when I was achieving, I had a secret fear that I would be found out that I was bad or that I was evil or that there was something fundamentally wrong with me. Also, what the type of trauma that I've experienced, and so many of us and so many young people are experiencing, what it does is it puts you in a constant state of fight or flight, right? Trauma shuts down your frontal cortex, which is your ability to process information as fully and as clearly as possible. So I was always second guessing myself. I was not able to just have a normal existence with people.
It was interesting what you said when you, a moment ago, that we all have trauma. And the three of us were just kind of talking to each other because I said, I'm going to ask you, what is trauma and how is it impacted? And Martine, you wanted to share a little bit of your story about when I said, how has trauma impacted you?
Sure. Well, my mother was a Holocaust survivor, so her entire family died in Auschwitz, And she survived. She actually, when they were liberating, well, not liberating, before they liberated the camps, but they evacuated the camp. She ran away during the night and got away, which is kind of miraculous. So, you know, not only did she experience that trauma, but, you know, the fact that she had 3 children was sort of in defiance of the whole final solution, right? That there was not supposed to be another generation, and here we are, so.
And how's it impacted you, knowing that story, part of that story? How's that impacted you with your work?
I mean, I think that's why I do what I do and why I'm so committed to finding help and healing for children who've been through it. There isn't a day that goes by that it doesn't affect me. Yeah. Even though outwardly, and you know what you said about achievement, you know, and what did you say?
Achievement does not equal wellness.
That's right. I'm not well at all. I've been very blessed, had an incredible education. I grew up, you know, with a lot of privilege, but it's there underlying everything all the time for me. And there's just no question that it's not only the trauma that I experienced, but there is that generational trauma, that history of trauma that very different from people who grow up in poverty, or people of color who experience, you know, racism all the time. But there is an aspect of it that is inherited. There's no question about it.
And so for those who may not know about the work of the Children's Institute, talk a little bit about your mission, the scope of services in your work. And I know that you and Daniel have collaborated, so I want to talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, the collaboration actually that you referred to happened before I've only been there for 2 years. So that actually happened about 5 years ago. So we're very lucky that we have a history with Daniel. But Children's Institute works with children and families who've been exposed to trauma. It's as simple as that. For many years we were known for working with victims of sexual abuse and trauma, but that is the common thread. We now are pretty big. We're about $75 million organization. We have 1,000 employees. We serve about 22,000 children and families every year. The common denominator is trauma, as I said. And we focus on 3 vulnerable populations, so children under 5, children attending high-needs schools, and families that are involved with systems, mainly the child welfare system, but also probation, justice system, CalWorks, you name it. So we really look at those populations. We do many things. I could list a lot of programs, Head Start, mental health, so forth, but it really is about looking at the needs of those specific highly vulnerable groups of people and trying to meet them where they're at with services, but also a vision of the future and a vision of wellness, and taking, you know, philanthropic investment and marrying it with the majority of our funding is government funding, but finding that mix where we can innovate and we can fill in the gaps and enrich the services that we offer.
Okay. And, you know, I didn't get a pass on trauma either. Many of you who've heard me speak know that, one, I lost a sister to gun violence. You know, she went to work one day and just didn't come back. And I talk about how that impacts me, that, you know, anyone who's close to me, including some of my colleagues at Cal Wellness, know that I get a little antsy when people that I care about don't get to where they should be. I start going to a really dark place. I'm also a victim of sexual child abuse, and that's the achievement part for me. It was like, as a result of that experience, thought that achievement would make that pain go away, and it didn't until I got help and went through some really deep therapy. But and I think I would probably say the issue about shame was part of it in terms of reaching out. And then it gets complicated because when you tell your story, you end up telling the story of others. So I'm curious about, Daniel, how's your father? Is he still alive? And how are your brothers?
Right. So my father, despite multiple attempts, still wrestles with addiction. One of my brothers is actually in a maximum security prison right now in Boston, facing charges for second-degree murder. And then my third brother is doing fairly well. But what became evident in my family was that there was a legacy of mental health challenges. And when my father was in one of his longer stints in rehab, it was discovered that he had battled, deep depression his entire life, and since very early. And then I have one of my brothers, the one who deals with crack cocaine addiction, who's in prison currently, was a diagnosed paranoid schizophrenic. And I have another sibling who was as well. And so, again, it's all of these issues. And I just wanted to specify to the point, I think it's so powerful that you all are looking at this idea of a trauma-informed lens into philanthropy. Because one of the things, because of the nature of the work I do, I get invited a lot to speak at conferences, and I love doing it. But one of the things that has been consistent over the decade plus of doing that is a lot of funders' frustration of the needle not moving, right? Like, why are we putting all this money in programs and we're not seeing the change that we all desperately want? And what I think makes sense is that a lot of times we're going after outcomes and deliverables we can measure, right? Do more young people get to college? Do teenage pregnancy, gang violence rates go down? But what I believe is the issue is that if someone is in the space of such intense trauma and such intense shame and such a sense of identity that does not have a possibility, or doesn't believe my life has worth, does not believe that there's a future I can see, believe that I'm destined to be like the other people in my family who suffered, you can throw all the programs in the world at them, but the capacity, the ability to take advantage of them, follow through, and to let that lead to meaningful change, it's so much harder, right? And so this need to look at the trauma our young people are dealing with, or any vulnerable populations are dealing with, and really address that, I think is so core to funders being able to have more successful outcomes.
Yeah. We are beginning to really think about this in our work at Cal Wellness. And last week we had a board meeting, and we had an amazing speaker, Dr. Ken Hardy, psychologist. Yeah. If you haven't heard him, you should. He talked about race as being part of the trauma, and I think, you know that. I mean, I know how I feel when I go into a room still to this day, and if it's all white, there's something physically happening to me. Again, this is a story, those of you who've heard me speak, because it's still very traumatic, living, in Virginia, 10 years without access to running water. And I really, think about that was pretty traumatic. And it wasn't because there wasn't water available in the city of Alexandria. It was just because it stopped right before the Black community. And so just so traumatic, of that, still the idea that even, today we're dealing with issues around access to water, and it really impacts, brown and Black communities. So tell me how race plays into the issue of trauma. And what was great about Dr. Hardy was that it's like, I'm not making this up. And others, the Black men and others in my world that I love, we're not making it up. It's really there, and there is a traumatic and sometimes even a health and wellness. Would you agree?
Absolutely. You know, I think there's so many layers to all of this, and I love this idea of our common humanity, because that is what I believe in my core, that and science tells us that, right? We're already all vibrating molecules of energy. We're really all made up of the same stuff, and we live in a world of systems and constructs. So first of all, there's the legacy of race in our country, the legacy of slavery, the legacy of a whole group of people who don't necessarily know their roots or have any connections to that roots. Or we talk about epigenetics and the idea of trauma being passed through DNA and through history. That's all being proven and researched and real. You add on top of that the challenges to the family of all of that oppression and disenfranchisement and lack of opportunity historically over years and years and years, you know. So there's all those factors. And then I think of things like this idea of double consciousness that W.E.B. Du Bois talks about. Mm-hmm. And I've had a really particular journey with that. But it's this idea that when you are a person of color, you're other, we're speaking specifically African American, there's a double consciousness. It's literally not safe, historically, to speak your mind. It's not safe to show up as a fully integrated being. So you have a part of you that's always watching what you're saying. You have a double consciousness, right? Then you add on what trauma does. Trauma puts you in this fight or flight mode. So you also have another part of yourself that is watching everything you say and do just to be safe. You add on that the reality, no one's making it up, that you can go into a black person's home and kill them. And people are being shot on the street, and then the people who are doing it are not being sentenced. This is the reality that we're living in. So unless someone is not interested in our common humanity, it's not hard to figure out that there's tremendous trauma on a daily basis that people of color are carrying in this country because of the legacy of race that we've yet to heal, that is playing out like a wound that's festering because it's so infected.
You know, and yes. You know, I was thinking about that because, you know, when you think about it, and you could have, I know you weren't here for John Powell, but he was really talking so much about what you were saying about the other and the structures that we put in place. And, you know, I grew up in, Virginia, and when it was time for me to start elementary school, my sister and I were bused across town to separate but unequal school. And then this is the positive piece. A group of philanthropists, primarily in the Jewish community, decided that this was horrendous, and that they were going to push a test case to test the Brown decision, because Virginia had its own little thoughts about putting up. So they couldn't use race because of the Brown, but what the city of Alexandria did use was to say that the blacks, and it was about 10 of us that was part of the class, were mentally deficient, that we were not mentally able to perform, and we eventually won the case. But when you really think about this, as John talked about today, the power of structured exclusion. But it was interesting that I really thought about these people who really didn't know us, who helped us in the white community, who tutored, went on to members of the Jewish community, volunteered and tutored us. Once they got over, my mother got over the fact that they could come to our house as long as they didn't ask to use the bathroom, which was the outhouse. So it's just, it's doubled. And then the other issue that I want you to talk about is how art has, you're an artist.
Yes.
And I bet you can remember the first time you saw a professional artistic performance. When was it? Where was it? And what happened?
Well, you know, it's wild because, you know, I grew up poor, so I didn't see a lot of professional art when I was young. But, you know, there was a library, and it was back when they had videos, videos in the library. And I remember walking through the video section, and I saw this beautiful dark brown woman in this huge gown on the cover, and there was like these two, you know, white men on either side of her in like this period clothing, and I got it, and it was La Forza del Destino, and it was Leontine Price singing in a Verdi opera. And I went home and I played it, and that was my first sort of understanding of the magic of story and the capacity to inhabit other worlds, or to dream other worlds, or to become other worlds. And to me, the same thing that the people in the Jewish community who helped you when you were a child and helped that community, it is that we do have a common humanity. And I think that that's what artists do. Artists remind us of our common humanity. There's a story at the heart of everything, and I think what we're dealing with now in our nation in particular is a story of separation, an illusion of separation that's been percolating under the surface for some years, has obviously been more blatant in our history, and now is on full display. And we have an opportunity to decide what kind of story do we want to tell moving forward, right? Similarly, when it comes to trauma, trauma creates a story, like we've already talked about, a story of shame, a story that my life does not have worth, a story that I don't have possibility, a story that I'm destined to repeat what I inherited. But when we look at the tools of the arts, imagination, words, speaking, empowered speaking, the ability to dream, to see, to get present to what am I thinking, what am I feeling, how do I use thoughts and feelings rather than thoughts and feelings using me? When you put all of those tools in front of a young person or any person who's dealing with trauma, there's an opening, right? There's a window into possibility just through the gift of creativity and imagination. And the awareness that we are living at the effect of a story, but we do not have to be limited by that story.
Right. Martine, tell us how the Children's Institute has kind of used art, obviously just collaborating with Daniel, but tell me how important is art in terms of working with the population that you're working with?
Well, you know, one of the things I was just thinking about when you were talking about creating stories is thinking back on my mother. The way she was told to deal with her trauma was to get her tattoo removed. So I grew up seeing this scar on her arm. You know, what is that? I'll tell you later, And eventually she told me, but that was it, just take it off. She never was told to talk about it. No therapy, are you kidding? 1947 in Tulsa, Oklahoma, there was not a lot of therapy going on. So the ability to talk and to create those narratives is just incredibly powerful. I think, you know, I've been very influenced by the work of Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris. I'm sure many people in this room know her. She was here last week speaking to all different groups of people. And, you know, she talks about, obviously, what is trauma and why it's so damaging, but then she talks about all these mitigating factors and things that she has brought into her clinic, in addition to mental health, that are healing, right? And the arts definitely fit into that category. It's you know, healthy relationships, mental health, nutrition, sleep. I know I'm forgetting something. But that is definitely a piece of it, the ability to give voice to what happened, number one. And number two, that bridging between the generations, because you know, she talks about the buffering, the presence of the buffering adult caregiver in many cases it's the parent, it could be somebody else, which is, why parenthetically her testimony about the separation of the children at the border was so powerful, because she talked about not only the experience of traumatizing these children, but in the same moment taking away the one thing that would help them to heal, which is the parent, and that buffering presence. So I think that the work that we do, whether it's under the label of mental health, we do many other things. We do after-school programs, we do soccer, we do other enrichment activities. We take kids to camp out in the Central Valley. We will be bringing back I Dream into the schools. But I think that it really is about developing that resilience in addition to whatever professional services that the children get. In the context of something like Head Start or any other program that's extremely, kind of comprehensive and holistic, I think it has to do with really addressing the needs of the parents at the same time, recognizing that kids obviously don't live alone. They live in a system of family and community. And you really have to work on all three levels, right, to address the needs of the child. And I would say that community piece is probably the most novel and most innovative thing that we're doing now, thanks to some grants that we've gotten recently, including the Innovations Grant from the Department of Mental Health. This ability to go out into communities and really talk about trauma at a community level, to create social awareness campaigns, to make people understand what is trauma, what does it look like, where to go for help. Why is it dangerous? Why is this dangerous?
Well, what is trauma? How would you define it?
What is
when I was growing up, it was just stuff that happened. So what is trauma?
Listen again, I'm no scientist, but trauma, I think, is the experience of danger and a threat to your being. And it can be physical trauma, it can be emotional trauma, right? I think you, a moment ago, talked about that feeling of walking into a room like that. I just sort of saw this image when you talked about it of what does it feel like to walk in and be the only person of color in a room, and it was like this visceral thing that you were communicating. What happens is anytime you experience that fight, flight, or freeze response, that's trauma. And again, Nadine Burke-Harris talks about, it's a very helpful thing that we have this in our bodies, that if we're walking around and we see the bear in the woods, all of a sudden, the frontal cortex shuts down, the blood goes to the extremities, we can run, we can lift that car off the baby, we can outrun the bear, we can do all these superhuman things because it will save our life in that moment. And then, it's over. You kind of go back to your status quo ante. And, what she says is, what if the bear comes home every night? And you experience it over and over and over and over and over. And you experience it when you are trying to walk to school and it's not safe. And you see a dead body. You've seen violence in your community. Perhaps you've seen it in your home. But even if it's not your own family, you're surrounded by it. And that physical response, the adrenaline and the cortisol are released, and that is triggered over and over, and it actually changes the epigenetics. It changes, how your DNA is read. It changes how you develop. It changes how your brain functions, and it impacts physical health as well as mental health. So,
does it matter, Martine, who and where intervention happens? For example, I had an interesting conversation with one of our grantees who she herself has gone through a lot of trauma, and she really pushed back on philanthropy, supporting, for example, trauma specialists to work in group homes or in prisons. Her sense is, as someone who's been through those facilities themselves are trauma-inducing, and unless you really talk about a system change, it's not working. And she says, save your money. Would you agree with that?
I think it's a longer conversation. I don't think that prisons work. I do think that group homes are kind of in a different category in that they can be healing, places of healing. Many of them are not run that way, but many of them are. And I think the idea of having a trauma-informed space is about everybody who works there and everybody who interacts with the child being knowledgeable about what all of this means and being able to recognize behavior that is, not maladaptive, right? That's not socially acceptable, as not necessarily being a deviant individual, right? But as being a symptom of trauma. And it can be externalizing behavior, it can be internalizing behavior. It's often harder to see the internalizing. But I think that if you're talking about a group home or a school, I don't want to argue with somebody who has had a lived experience, but I do think that it's possible to create environments where everybody from the janitor to the bus driver to the person serving lunch to the teacher to the administrator and so forth, if they have a fundamental understanding of what children go through and what their behavior means and why people are acting this way, it really does change the institution, and it changes the way that they deal with behavior. It changes, expulsions, suspensions, all of those sorts of things. So I'm somewhat hopeful about it, but I don't think just having the one specialist walking in works.
Right.
If that's maybe what she was referring to.
And Daniel, what about you? Do you think it matters who? I mean, you said, and I'm pulling back from our last week's discussion, and I said, okay, what were some key intervention points? You talked about people. You talked about teachers. You talked about education or whatever. So what really were some significant points for you? And certainly we've talked about art.
I would say one of the core tools for me was exposure and awareness. Being able to see worlds and people other than what I had experienced in my own life was like a light bulb going on. Like when we did our show at the Wallace last week, we were able to bring 160 young people, largely from Watts, to this facility that they spent $80 million renovating. I don't want to overstate it, but then they were able to see someone on the stage who very openly shared, experiences that I had, and then was able to do this performance where I got a lot of affirmation and response from the audience. That turns, a light bulb on. And then when I say awareness, it was the awareness that I could heal. It was the awareness that I wasn't trapped, that something else was possible. And I work with I Dream. Our first step in the program is a performance. The young people get to see a performance that we hope relates to their experience. Then the next step is what we call a catalyst curriculum, and it's a 6.5-hour experience where the young people experience everything from mindfulness and meditation, ability to follow one's breath and to notice one's thoughts and one's feelings, to understanding our potential in all the roles we play over the course of the day, to the ability to use art to write about a traumatic experience and then to reframe the traumatic experience in an empowering way. And Dr. Sandra Chase, who works with Children's Institute, we evaluated, and she also observed our pilot. And young people, many of them were able in this one-day experience to accomplish what they say about 12 to 13 weeks of 1 hour a week cognitive behavioral therapy accomplishes, which is the awareness that one has trauma and the awareness that one has the capacity to heal that trauma. It doesn't get healed, but once you have the awareness.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Do you think you can get healed from
No.
I mean, it's kind of
I'm
like
still trying to heal.
I know.
Right.
But we're carrying this with us, right?
We're carrying this with us, and then I Dream goes on to a 3-month program beyond that. But I think that for me, it was the awareness, because once I was aware, I was hungry. I was hungry. It's like when you get a taste after feeling like, there was nothing to eat, And so for me, because I had an unusual amount of traumatic experiences early on, it's honestly been like a 20-year healing journey, And again, I'm still on my journey, but I'm much more healed than I could have ever imagined I would be. But exposure and awareness. And then I've had lots of angels, whether that's been people who gave me scholarships to school, or celebrities like Ruby Dee or Sidney Poitier who took me under their wing, or even people like both of you who understand what I'm trying to do with this crazy program and, you know, are supporting in the ways that you are.
Okay. How much time do I have? Because I could talk forever. Could someone give me a time check?
I see a sign that says Q&A.
Where is it?
Are you telling us the Q&A?
Do we have 10 minutes? 10 minutes. Okay. Well, let's talk about the arts. That's something that all of us, I have a bias. I mean, I remember my first experience with art, and again, it was underwritten by Philanthropy in my hometown that took a group of us who couldn't afford it across the Potomac River to see the opera Carmen.
Oh, wow.
And thought she's really feisty. And I was feeling like somebody has really been holding out on me. I was sitting on, the edge of my seat like I was when you were, there was something that physically was happening. And given where I was and the other things that weren't so terrific in my life, art just opened up an entire world. Art has traditionally been a hard sell. You'll talk to, funders. Well, we're really serious. We're social justice funders. And art comes across as something frivolous. Tell me you have the opportunity to address a group of funders. And how many of you are arts funders? Raise your hand. Yeah, it's not, there's a lot of folks that we can try to convince. Because
everybody who didn't raise their hand.
Yeah, and this kind of goes back to John Powell, where we kind of look at, funding priorities or buckets of work. And I think it's hard to be a social justice funder without thinking about the power of art. So, do your thing, convince.
It's a big task. What I would say more than anything is that a lot of our conversations, I feel, are very heady. Particularly when it comes to a lot of our most vulnerable communities. And we have to look at statistics and all the theories and all of that. But there's something about the heart space that when the heart and the soul are moved, real transformation can happen. I remember sitting down with two presidents of major foundations about 8 years ago when I was first talking about this, work and the importance of art and sort of narrative change and all of that. And they're saying that's exactly what's needed and my board will never support it. Those were things that people said to me because it's hard to measure. And so my response back would be, are you getting the results you want? If not, why not try something different? Arts show us how connected we are, and arts fundamentally remind us that we're responsible for each other. In my show, I was not able to do that here, but I play 40 different characters, and they range from a little girl with HIV to an old grandmother and all these other different kind of characters. I'm able to do that because I've developed, through my relationship and my dance with art, the capacity to understand on a visceral level that we're all made of the same stuff and we're all connected to each other. And this world and this particular climate is bringing out our emotions like never before. I've seen people full of more rage and fire and fight than ever before. That's emotion. That's the realm that art lives in. All of this feeling like, what can we do? What do I do with all these feelings? That's the realm that artists live in. I think that whether that's your primary funding area or not, the ability to bring a conversation that is creative, that is artistic, that brings the tools of the art into it, is going to increase the likelihood of progress. because we're not just dealing then with the mental level of things, we're integrating the heart and the soul. And I know that even those of you who are working at the greatest foundations, it's not like you're becoming millionaires off of this. You're doing this because somewhere in your heart space, in your soul space, you believe that change is possible and you want to affect change. And I believe that arts and artists have powerful tools to do that.
Yeah.
I would just add a couple of things to that, which is the power of the arts to engage young people. You know, we hang out a shingle that says mental health or therapy, and not everybody wants to walk through that door. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's a stigma, sometimes it's a cultural thing, whatever. My kid's not crazy. You know, it's not always the card you want to lead with, right? Mm-hmm. But if you get young people involved in a program like this where they can tell their story, and that's why they're there. Mm-hmm. And maybe it leads to therapy, maybe it doesn't. I mean, not everybody needs therapy. But the process is therapeutic. And the other piece of it, I think, is, you know, having the voice of the people you serve front and center of the work is something that is so important that we often kind of lose sight of, because programs are designed by, you know, government bureaucrats or by us or by people sitting around in a boardroom saying, okay, how many therapists, how many case managers, what's the caseload? You know, we don't start necessarily with the people that we're serving. We try to, I mean, I try to, but I don't think that we do it consistently every time. Being able to feature the voices of the community, mm-hmm. the kids, the parents, whoever is going to participate in the program, I think is just, it lights up the whole world. Mm-hmm. Because you get to really understand the power of the work, and it gives funders and others access to what it is that we're dealing with. You can't mm-hmm. see therapy happen, mm-hmm. but you can see this.
So can you end with just sharing some thoughts for, let's say we've convinced folks about the arts, about the importance of really thinking about work through looking at issues around trauma. What are some strategies? What are things we should do, and what are things we shouldn't do as we leave here and think about, okay, I'm ready, around trauma-supported services, maybe there are organizations you know of, or strategies, in addition to maybe supporting the Children's Institute or your collaboration. What are some other things that you know about that's happening in Southern California that we might want to just think about?
Yeah, one of the things that to the first question, and it actually underscores the point that Martine is making. Another lens, is a particularly unique lens I have by speaking at a lot of conferences and things, is that often the populations that are being served are not represented in the room. So you have a lot of people with lots of degrees, well-intentioned, well-meaning, sharing the same core values, but we're not actually hearing from the populations and the people that need to be served. And so what I would say as a core thing, which is what to do and not to do, is this idea of piloting in on communities and doing things to them. Working at the level of community, I understand that that's really problematic for people, especially if you want to really talk about people's stuff. But creating circumstances where there are supports in place and invitations for communities to say what it is they need, and supports to allow that healing to happen from the grassroots and not just the grass tops.
Great. Martine.
As much as I love iDream and the work we do, it's not just about that. I think if I want people to be aware of one thing when they leave this room, it's this idea, first of all, awareness of trauma, the prevalence of trauma in the community and in the home, and its long-term impact on mental health, substance abuse, but also physical health. The research shows the higher number of adverse childhood experiences, the higher rates of stroke, cancer, cardiopulmonary disease. It's not just what you would think, which is risky behavior. It's so much so that the life expectancy, of somebody born in 90049, which is, Brentwood, West Side, can be 20 years more than somebody born in 90002, which is Watts. I mean, that's in our own city, just 10 miles from here. The life expectancy can be 20 years shorter. I mean, that to me is mind-blowing. You don't have to go to the farthest reaches of the earth to find dire poverty, extreme trauma, and a public health crisis of enormous proportions. So to me, this is one way to talk about addressing it, but I think we all have to be committed to and kind of galvanized by this information, and knowing that whatever we do, we have to be aware of how damaging trauma is to children and families and communities.
Great. Well, as the clock counts down, thank you for joining in this conversation, our 500 best friends or so sitting out there. I hope that you'll leave a better believer in the power of art, a deeper understanding of trauma, and how you might want to integrate it, understanding how race and trauma works. And I think more importantly, just in the stories that we've shared, how it transformed our lives, how it's helped us be healthy and well. We'll always have the scars of trauma, but I think because of programs that, like the Children's Institute are doing, the power of the amazing Daniel Beaty, we're stronger, we're healthier. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.
Join us.